What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time to talk about some Tau. Some good alliteration right there. The internet has been currently ripping itself apart after some Tau spoilers were released on Warhammer Community, and so let's talk about the knowledge that we have about the new Tau Codex for 9th edition coming out early 2022 that has been released so far, so that we can get a holistic view of what the new faction is going to look like in its new incarnation when it releases. Spoilers have been dropping for the last month or so on Warhammer Community as we sort of glacially move towards its release window, but the last spoiler, spoiling the new profile of the Tau TX7 Hammerhead's Railgun weapon, has divided the internet more dramatically than a political debate, and you had better believe we're going to talk about it. As always, if you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel, drop a like and a subscribe if you like Tau, or even if you don't like Tau. One way or another, that's fine by me. And let's talk about the new tactical philosophies that are going to define the 9th edition Tau Codex. Tactical philosophies are essentially going to be the unique faction benefit that a Tau Empire army will get. These are sort of combat doctrine, command protocol style abilities that will affect your whole army depending on the philosophy that you choose at the start of each game. This is different than the current way that the tactical philosophies operate, which is a once per game aura that is projected from your commanders on the turn that you choose to use it. Instead, these new abilities will come into play at the start of the game after the roll to go first. The tactical philosophy that you choose will give you a series of special abilities to your entire army on particular battle rounds. The first one, Mantka, the Killing Blow, benefits you in the early game, giving you an additional benefit on rounds 1 through 3 that slowly degrades over time. In these battle rounds, this allows your entire army to count as stationary after it performs a normal move or advance, allowing you to move more quickly to get within the range specified by the tactical philosophy, and also allowing you to benefit a little bit better from heavy weapons on your infantry. That range I mentioned earlier is important because as long as your units are within that specified range band and attack the closest eligible enemy unit, meaning that you're not going to be able to target select very much when trying to make use of these tactical philosophies, which does introduce some interesting counterplay for your opponent. This philosophy will give you +1 to your armor penetration characteristic, and you get to reroll rolls of 1 to wound. The range that benefits you in degrades over time, so on Battle Round 1, it's 18 inches, Battle Round 2, it's 12, and Battle Round 3, it's 9 inches. After Battle Round 3, you will lose all the benefits from the Mantka philosophy, meaning that you no longer will get that +1 EP or rerolls, and you will no longer count as stationary after moving. The second option for a philosophy, the alternative to Mantka, is the Kauyan. This affects you in the late game, and it allows your entire army to fall back and shoot with a -1 to hit penalty. So essentially, the Ultramarines chapter tactic for your entire army on those last 3 battle rounds of the game. This also has an additional ability, but that's essentially locked to a 12-inch range band. So unlike the Mantka, the range that Kauyan is effective in does not degrade, but it only starts at 12 inches, which isn't that great. It also does not give you any effect if you fell back or are engaged, and only works when you're targeting the closest eligible enemy unit within that 12 inches. So again, there is a lot of counterplay from your opponent to try to negate the effects of the Kauyan. In this case, this gives you exploding hit rolls, so additional hits on an unmodified roll of whatever, and the hit roll required to get that explosion slowly advances as the battle rounds go on. So on Battle Round 3, the first battle round that the Kauyan is going to be active, you get exploding 6s. On Battle Round 4, you get exploding 5s, and on Battle Round 5, you get exploding 4+. This is an incredibly powerful ability, but again, has a lot of criteria. You have to target the closest eligible enemy, you can't have fallen back, and you cannot be in engagement range. There are going to be a lot of units in this Tau Codex that we'll talk about later that are going to be able to fire well within engagement range, something that Tau players and even people who played against Tau have been asking for years, so that's super exciting. But obviously, the effect of exploding hits is a super big deal. I actually super duper love this mechanic. I think it's super flavorful. The flexible strategy of the Tau is really kind of made manifest in these mechanics. And I do also appreciate that they've tried to limit the power of ranged alpha strikes by either making the more powerful benefit, the Kaoyan, only affect you at the end of the game, meaning that your super faction ability, your big faction mechanic is going to do nothing when you're trying to commit a ranged alpha strike, whereas the Mont Ka has a limited range. So if you're going to use the version of the philosophy that works immediately, then your army is going to have to move forward aggressively to engage the enemy army. This is exactly what I wanted from a Tau Codex. The worst thing that we could get from a Tau army would be to be, an Adeptus Mechanicus Redux, where your entire army is incentivized to sit on your table edge and fire immensely powerful long-range weapons at your opponent with this super uninteractive, super boring game plan. But fortunately, this Tau Codex either forces you to choose between dealing additional damage early, but also having to move forward aggressively, versus playing cagier and dealing additional damage later at the expense of doing less damage in that early game where the most of your army is intact and you're going to be the best set up to deal that powerful ranged alpha strike. I also really appreciate that there is counterplay on both sides of the table, because you choose before the game starts, or you choose after the roll to go first, which means the Tau player has a lot of control over which side of these tactical philosophies you choose, but also because all of them have this kind of positional requirement where they only work on the closest enemy unit within a certain distance. You can potentially be throwing screening units in front of your more powerful units in order to have them soak the benefit of these tactical philosophies, which I think is very cool. It just adds a new layer of interaction to the Tau matchup, and I think that's a really good way to approach it. That said, we have been given a lot of knowledge about the weapons and units that are going to be benefiting from these tactical philosophies. So let's move on to some of the other spoilers, more unit-specific spoilers that we've gotten. We get a couple spoilers about buffs to infantry weapons. We know that pulse carbines are moving up to range 24, still an assault 2, strength 5 weapon. At a 24-inch range is a very powerful infantry gun, if I do say so myself. Pulse rifles moving up to range 36 from range 30 that they were in the previous version, and getting AP1. That is still a rapid-fire 1 weapon, and that extended range means that they're going to get their second shot out to 18 inches, which means that while they don't necessarily have the consistent 2 shots that the pulse carbine has, and the ability to advance and fire, obviously, although you can use Mont Ka to count them as stationary if they are advancing with their strike teams, that 18-inch range 2 shots with the extra AP makes that pulse rifle option super-duper nice. We also saw an article in Warhammer Community about the Dark Strider character, a character who saw a little bit of play in 8th edition for his ability to benefit troops around him. He gave your infantry the ability to fall back and shoot, which was pretty effective, and had an ability to give them +1 to wound to a single infantry unit within 6 inches against a single enemy unit. That ability has been significantly buffed, now just requiring the core keyword. This is a pretty big deal, giving +1 to wound to an entire core unit, especially with how powerful Tau Death Stars can be using bodyguard battlesuits or crisis battlesuits. This guy could be an absolute auto-include in lists that use the classic Tau Sept. Now, we don't know any of the sub-faction abilities or their other benefits that you'll get from your sub-faction selection, so whether or not Tau actually ends up being the most optimal pick, I don't know, but I'm sure this guy will factor into that. Now, to be fair, we don't actually know what has the core keyword. I would be shocked if battlesuit units do not get it, or at least the smaller jump pack battlesuit units, especially the crisis battlesuits. But again, we just don't know, and it may only be restricted to a lot of the infantry units. We also saw the model spoiled, and I think he looks very cool. He has this little sensor drones there that give him that +1 to wound effect. They can go out and scan enemy units to show off their weaknesses. I did think that this dude had a camo cloak when I first saw the model, but it turns out he's just on like a tactical ruined wall, I guess. Although I think if you modeled with him with a camo cloak, it would look absolutely sweet. So all you modelers out there, get working on your camo cloaks. I think that would be super cool. We also saw an entire article based entirely around battlesuits and the benefits that battlesuits and a lot of their weapon systems are going to get. First off, battlesuits or units with the battlesuit keyword can fire within engagement range. Now, one thing that's important to note about this ability is that any weapons with the blast keyword will still be ineligible to fire in melee, because the blast keyword itself is what makes that weapon ineligible to fire. So things like air-bursting fragmentation projectors, which I assume will retain the blast keyword, although we don't know that, I imagine will not be fireable into melee, despite the fact that the battlesuit unit can potentially fire into melee. This is almost a copy and paste of Big Guns Never Retire, but also does not impose the -1 to hit roll for firing heavy weapons into engagement range, since that part is a component of the Big Guns Never Tire mechanic. So that means that your non-monster, non-vehicle battlesuits, which is probably going to be the majority of them, will be able to fire all of their non-blast weapons into units that they're in melee with without any penalties, which is frickin' super cool. In addition, we got some updates to further ranged weapons in the Tau arsenal. Burst cannons going up to Assault 6 from their previous version of Assault 4. Still 18-inch range and Strength 5 AP 0. This does mean that the volume of fire from a burst cannon equipped unit, although the actual stat line of that weapon is still not the most exciting thing ever. Strength 5 AP 0 is a fine profile in the current metagame of 40k, but not incredible. That said, obviously some things are going to buff them, like, for example, the Mont-Ka philosophy, which will give them that coveted +1 AP. In addition, upgrades like the target lock now allows it to ignore cover, which is a pretty big deal. Essentially, in a lot of instances, especially now that light cover area terrain is so ubiquitous in the competitive 40k scene, this is a lot of times going to give you +1 AP against infantry. We also see Tau Flamers going up to D6 +2 shots from their regular D6, still 12-inch range and still automatically hitting with all of those attacks at Strength 4, AP 0. This is a pretty nice quality of life change as well. We see an upgrade to the multi-tracker, which gives the carrier exploding 6s against units containing 6 or more models. That gives these battlesuits, if they elect to equip that multi-tracker, a little bit of additional punch against those big horde units. Something that's going to be very useful since we talk about their alternative anti-armor options later in this video. Now, we also saw some previews of battlesuit-specific stratagems, and these are an absolute doozy. The first one is Drop Threat Acquisition. This is a very expensive stratagem, costing 2 to 3 CP depending on the size of the battlesuit unit you're using it on. 4+ models, it will cost 3 CP. Otherwise, a 1, 2, or 3 strong unit will cost 2 CP. Still relatively expensive for just a 3-model unit, but the effect is pretty good. It gives you full rerolls to hit with your ranged attacks if you are set up on the battlefield using a Manta Strike or Homing Beacon. So essentially your Deep Strike style reserve abilities. That said, it's not any reserve ability, so you can't strategic reserve in units, which means that this might mostly be restricted to units coming in with jetpacks. The effect, though, is absolutely great. Full rerolls to hit, especially for a unit that's probably locked to Ballistic Skill 4 or Ballistic Skill 3. Most likely with Tau's classic weakness of having relatively average ballistic skills, despite the fact that they have such a high volume of attacks, is going to make a stratagem like this incredibly powerful, especially with the additional attacks that all of these weapons are probably going to be performing. That means a model equipped to 2 of these things could potentially be firing 12 times with full rerolls to hit at a potential +1 AP from the Mont-Ka, or exploding 6s, both from multi-tracker and from the Cao Yan tactical philosophy, giving you a Tesla effect. That's pretty cool. That said, even cooler is the other stratagem that we saw previewed, Strike and Fade. This is a return to the old jump, shoot, jump mechanic from the days of yore. This is used at the start of your shooting phase and allows a jetpack unit, which is essentially just your crisis battlesuit teams, to fire immediately, then make a normal move of up to 6 inches. This can allow you to move the unit farther along the table, using it like Fire and Fade that we see Eldari use a lot, letting them take their normal movement, then use the Strike and Fade to move onto an objective or a similar crucial area of the table. In addition, you can also use it in its probably more intended role to get the unit back out of line of sight after they've made their attacks. Now, the stratagem does have a modal cost. It's 1 CP. If you are 5 or fewer models, 6+ models, it will cost you 2 CP. Now, there's some interesting things that we can glean from the wording of both of these stratagems. First off, Drop Threat Acquisition specifically refers to battlesuit models in your unit when you are assessing the cost of the stratagem. Strike and Fade also, when assessing the cost of the stratagem, specifically excludes drone models, which means that we may have jetpack models that are not necessarily battlesuits. Currently, this keyword is just restricted to ethereals using a hover drone, but those units don't innately have any ranged attacks. That said, those hover drones can be accompanied by drone models in the current version of the codex, and the strike and fade stratagem specifically excludes drone models when assessing the cost of the stratagem. So interestingly, that probably means that drones now become part of their parent unit when they're added in the list building step. Currently, when you are accompanied by drones, you are deployed as a single unit, and then the drones split off, meaning that all of the drones operate as individual units and then will typically use their savior protocol. That may mean that drones are just essentially ablative wounds for the units that they're accompanying, with units like shield drones able to potentially force big, heavy anti-tank rounds onto an invulnerable save, rather than going through the savior protocols mechanic as we saw in the previous version. That's how drones have worked traditionally, with the overall effect being significantly less flexible than savior protocols, and probably less powerful since you're no longer able to sink infinite las cannons into the dozens of individual tactical drone units or accompanied drone units that have split off from your battlesuits and battlesuit commanders and Riptide battlesuits and all that stuff. That said, it does make the army probably a lot easier to play and prevents you from giving up secondaries like Grind Them Down, or in GT 2022, the new Retrieval Mission alternative primary scoring that focuses on killing more enemy units than you lost. Those two individual drones that could split off from a single battlesuit oftentimes ended up being a liability in those cases and allowed your opponent to farm a lot of victory points from you over the course of the game. But no longer. If they do end up being part of the unit, which is what it looks like it does, they're just going to be additional models in a unit, and your total unit count is going to shrink significantly, which does have a lot of significant benefits. So there's a lot we can glean from just this one article that hasn't necessarily all been spoiled, which definitely heralds some fundamental changes to how the faction operates from their 8th edition codex. And with that, let's move on to the pièce de résistance from these spoilers. It's time to talk about the Railgun. Now, the TX7 Hammerhead gunship has been kind of a meme in 40k for a really long time. But in the 8th edition codex, the Railgun Hammerhead was a 140-point platform for delivering a single ballistic skill 3 las cannon shot for that sweet, sweet D6 damage. It was a potential for some additional mortal wounds on 6s to wound, a 1 in 6 chance you'll deal more than maybe 6 damage with this thing. But overall, it was ridiculously underpowered. Probably one of the most poorly designed vehicle weapons in the entire game. That said, the glow up that the new Railgun has received in this recent reveal is pretty insane. The newest version of the Railgun that was spoiled on Warhammer Community is a 72-inch range, which is to be expected, one-shot strength 14 AP 6 D3 plus 6 damage weapon. That is already an impressive offensive profile, although at one shot, meaning that we are relatively high variance. That said, the abilities on the weapon are really what takes the cake. First off, you cannot take invulnerable saves against it, full stop. Which is obviously the #1 defense against these low volume, high impact anti-tank weapons, meaning that this thing is the terror of any heavy vehicle, regardless of its defensive profile. In addition, each time a successful wound roll is made for an attack with the Railgun, the target suffers 3 mortal wounds in addition to any other damage. Now, the timing on this is important because that phrase, in addition to any other damage, means that the mortal wounds are applied after the normal damage from the weapon, which means, first off, you know how much damage you've taken before you suffer mortal wounds, which means if you are, for example, a Space Marine vehicle and have taken the D3 plus 6 damage shot, maybe they rolled a 1 and only dealt 7, you know 3 mortal wounds are going to be coming in, and you could potentially use an Armor of Contempt to try to save one of those to keep your vehicle alive. In addition, if this thing fires at smaller targets, say, for example, just a unit of 1 wound infantry, the Railgun shot will go through, automatically vaporize one of those infantry, then 3 additional mortal wounds are applied, meaning the shrapnel from that exploding infantryman kills 3 additional models in that unit, which is, I don't know, kind of an evocative image. All of this insane offense is compounded by the new targeting array upgrade, which gives it a reroll on one of its hits every shooting step, meaning that probably lacking the core keyword and its associated benefits won't be a huge issue for this newly updated Hammerhead.
But no worries,
I hear you type out in the comment section,
I'll just take high model count, a big horde army, where it's one shot plus a couple mortal wounds will have no power!
well, dear commenter, let me introduce you to the submunitions stratagem. This stratagem, for the low cost of 1 CP and sacrificing your railgun shot this round, allows you to fire the special submunition shot at a unit within 36 inches in line of sight. It doesn't require a hit roll, this thing just happens automatically, and you roll 1d6 for each model in the target unit, adding +1 if the unit is 11 or more models. So essentially, a super blast weapon. For each 4+, including that +1, so 3+ for 11 or more model units, the unit suffers 1 mortal wound to a maximum of 8. This means that on average, on 10 model enemy units, this thing can plaster you for 4 or for 5-ish mortal wounds instead of the 4 that it would normally be doing by firing its normal gun. But those big horde units, it's almost 100% of the time, unless you roll spectacularly bad, gonna be plastering them for 8 mortal wounds. Now, that sounds like a lot, but in fairness, it's probably an actually pretty fair stratagem, considering the unit that it slaughters most efficiently are low-cost single-wound infantry, against which mortal wounds are mostly inconsequential. If you can imagine that this was like a Strength 6 AP2 2d6 shot blast weapon instead, it would probably be doing a similar amount of damage to a light infantry unit. The difference is that this can punch through a lot of defenses like invulnerable saves. That said, it does cost 1 CP and can only be used once per phase, which means that if you have multiple hammerheads, they cannot all be firing out submunitions every turn. And depending on how CP starved Tau end up being, depending on their swath of stratagems, you may actually not be able to use this submunition shot very much at all, and be relying on the extra 3 mortal wounds delivered by the normal railgun shot in order to be whittling down those infantry units from super long range. Now, this article has had the Warhammer 40k online community in a great flurry of discussion. Half the internet seems to think that the gun is the most broken, oh my god thing that's ever been released, and the other half, interestingly, typically Tau fans, I don't know what the correlation there is, it must be something, think it's actively bad. I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I am worried about the inherent uninteractability of a weapon that ignores functionally every saving throw in the game, since you need a 0+ armor save to even get an armor save against the AP6 value. So that's basically a Storm Shield Terminator with the effect of something like Side Steel Armor or standing in light cover, and then obviously ignoring all invulnerable saves as well, and all on a weapon that has a high enough output that damage reduction is no defense against it. Damage ignore rolls, or just an immensely thick wound count, are the only ways to avoid being absolutely crippled by a single shot from this gun. And that's all at a reasonable degree of reliability, giving the high strength, base 3+ ballistic skill, probably that's what it has in the current codex, and a built-in hit reroll from a targeting array. I have a sneaking suspicion that the camp naysaying the power of this weapon aren't really assessing it holistically as part of a Tau army. If this was the only long-range anti-tank the faction had access to, it would seem fairly tame, actually. But it's not like Tau won't have access to a plethora of long-range, high-impact shooting to clean up after the railgun leaves your 12-wound vehicle smoking on a single hit point. This is, after all, a faction whose base infantry have 36-inch range AP1 weapons. In most cases, despite the D3 damage variance of the weapon's core damage profile, a successful converted wound might as well be a death sentence to any regularly statted vehicle in the game. For most factions, it's also very hard to counterattack, given the vehicle's maneuverability at a 12-inch move, probably with fly, and adequate defensive stat line with T7 at 13 wounds. Again, that's all in the current codex, but I see no reason that it would change. It's all nothing to write home about, but definitely requires an actual dedicated anti-tank to reasonably kill. And at a 72-inch range, that allows it to sit at the absolute maximum of any possible counterfire, meaning that most factions in the game that don't have access to super long-range las cannons or something like that simply won't have an easy way to deal with it. That said, is the Sky Ray falling because this one weapon is good against some of the vehicles in the game? Absolutely not. A lot depends on the points cost of the whole system. It's likely that we see this new incarnation of the Hammerhead around 170 points. A good tool in the toolbox to deal with heavy armor, but not so inexpensive to be spammed regardless. At a significantly higher price cost, you probably won't see too many of these on the table, but at too much lower, and things do get actually scary. That said, this spoiler does still worry me a little bit. Not because I think it's necessarily too good, but I think it might actually be bad. If the level of damage creep that the Tau faction and 40k as a whole has reached makes a weapon that one-shots the vast majority of vehicles in the game more than 50% of the time, and has the potential to invalidate any faction or army archetype that relies on heavy armor and invulnerable saves to keep themselves alive in the center of the table, not immediately playable, then I'm worried for the tenor of the faction that that weapon belongs to, especially since there may very well be more powerful or effective combinations of units in the final 9th edition Tau Codex. But that brings up the point that there's still a ton of the Codex to be revealed, so making any snap judgments about the relative brokenness of specific weapons and units is prognosticatory to the extreme. At the very least, as a fan of the aesthetic of Tau armored cadres, I'm very excited for their vehicle selection to get a big glow up, and I hope for the return of the mechanized Tau lists from the days of yore. After all, these vehicles are cool looking enough to exist canonically in the Marvel Comics universe. Tau are one of my favorite factions visually, at least for their sci-fi pseudo-military look and visual cohesion. And I'd like nothing better to see shoals of hammerheads and devilfish delivering tactical strike teams to critical areas of the battlefield under the surgical covering fire of electronically guided submunitions. If that doesn't get your nerd sensibilities excited, 40k might not be the hobby for you. I don't know what to tell you. As a bit of an aside, I am a little disappointed just with the general design of the Railgun. I don't like that it ignores invulnerable saves. Those are the defense against a lot of heavy anti-tank weapons, and I think there are more elegant ways to get around your weapon being hamstrung by invulnerable saves. I like the idea that it deals damage regardless of whether or not your target has past their invulnerable save. And I would like to see that mechanic extrapolated further rather than this kind of mess that the Railgun has currently. Just simply making it a hugely damaging weapon that did not ignore invulnerable saves, but potentially had reduced damage if your target passed their save, could make it much more interesting to play both with and against. Making it, for example, like 12 damage, or maybe like a D3 plus 9 or something, means that failing that invulnerable save is absolutely terrifying. But then maybe making it deal a flat 6 damage if your target passed their save means that the Railgun's always doing consistent damage, but your opponent does have some counterplay in order to try to keep their units alive. Whereas the current version, assuming you're a 12 wound model, you basically just have to hope they don't roll the 3 on damage and one-shot you. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Let me know down in the comment section how excited you are for the new Tau Codex. And big thanks as well to everyone who supports the channel over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise. YouTube channel members also, you can join in the link down below the video. The new Advanced Tactics video just came out for both patrons and channel members, and I deep dive into transports, which, if we do see devilfish on the table, could be very relevant. I think that's a very good video, actually. I was pretty proud of it, to be honest. Also, Twitch subscribers over on Twitch. I stream every day, 4 p.m. on weekdays, U.S. Eastern Time, which is pretty cool. And I'm going to end the video here. Thanks for watching, everybody. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.